Hello and welcome to the Our Prenup Lawyer podcast, where you and I get to learn more about prenups as I interview professionals from the fields of family law, couples counseling, and wealth management. I'm your host, Libby Garabedian. Let's get started. The information provided in this podcast is prepared by Our Prenup Lawyer for informational purposes only and does not constitute legal advice. The information is not intended to create an attorney-client relationship. This is not legal advice or a substitute for obtaining legal advice from an attorney. A person listening or watching should not rely upon it in any manner without engaging professional counsel. The podcast is intended to communicate general information and, because recorded, may not be current. On this episode of Our Prenup Lawyer, we have Brian Page. Brian is the founder of Modern Husbands, a platform dedicated to helping married couples, especially dual career partners, manage money and household responsibilities together. He holds a Master's of Education degree, is an Accredited Financial Counselor, and Fair Play certified. Married since 2002, he and his wife have 3 children, and he draws both from his professional experience in financial education and his personal journey as a partner navigating dual career life. Before Modern Husbands, he spent about 15 years as a personal finance and economics educator, working with various national organizations, universities, and government bodies. Hi, Brian. Thank you for being here today.
Hey, thrilled to be here. Thanks for having me.
Let's jump right in and talk about Modern Husbands. Can you tell us about it?
Sure. I years ago moved from Cincinnati to Atlanta because my wife had an opportunity in her career that ultimately required that I shift careers. And making a very long story short, she's the breadwinner now. We have 3 kids, and we really needed at least one of us to be, more of the domestic safety net. And up until that point, it was really my wife. I worked, almost 80 hours a week with 2 full-time jobs. Now, at least at that point, and now, she's working long hours, she's traveling. And so I decided, I would be that person. So I Googled, how do you be a great husband? And I just started to learn about, obviously, the importance of making good financial decisions in your relationship, which is my professional background. But then I started to understand, what is entailed in managing a home that I was missing, that I didn't understand. And I became, kind of like this passionate reader of research and books and talking to experts. And I have my own podcast to understand, how I could be great in doing that for my partner. And just figured out that, there's a lot of us out there, a lot of men who, want to be great for their wives, and that in today's world, most households are dual career couples, and that oftentimes, not always, but oftentimes women get shouldered with more of the domestic labor, and it creates friction and resentment in the marriage. And then money is obviously the leading cause of divorce and stress and anxiety in a marriage. So I, with my professional background and my lived experiences, I decided to found Modern Husbands to share these ideas of managing money in the home as a team, to help other couples like us figure out how to kind of navigate in this new modern world.
That's amazing. So you touched on the idea of women oftentimes in marriages shouldering the domestic work. How important is it for each spouse to value what the other brings to the relationship and understand where they're coming from when they have different responsibilities?
That's a great question, because I think that what people need to understand is that the origin of the choices that we make dive much deeper than surface level headlines that you would see in the news. For example, as I had indicated, women on average do more of the work at home, in particular the mental load, the mental labor, the things that are necessary, to operate a home, meaning organizing, planning. Think of it this way. Think of it as the kinds of things that a coach does for his team. He's not actually executing it on the field, but he's the one or she is the one who is determining what the plan looks like. So anyhow, I think that it's important to recognize that in the modern world, money and masculinity are still married to one another. And so there's a lot of pressure, implicit and explicit pressure, for men to be financial providers. And unless a spouse says, look, you can be a provider in more ways than one, you can provide support, obviously earning an income, but also caregiving, taking more of a leadership role in the home, etc. And then most importantly, showing appreciation for that. So that's one thing that my wife does for me that feels really great, is just she shows appreciation for the work that I do inside the home. And obviously I have a job as well, but it's that really sticks out in a relationship, and that I also am confident enough in myself and recognize that I'm no longer the breadwinner, and that research indicates that women sometimes feel um, not ashamed, but like nervous about the fact that they're the breadwinner in a relationship because of these societal pressures for men to be breadwinners. So I go out of my way to thank her for, being such a rock star in her career. And, that mutual appreciation it is something that derives from, love for one another and supporting one another. And, I recognize that there's some that say, look, it doesn't matter what gender you are, you should never have to thank your partner for doing their fair share around the house. And look, I get it. Like that's a rational thing to say, I think, if you're like an office manager, but these are marriages. And it's far more complex than that. There are deep-seated feelings that drive the decisions that we make, and that when you feel loved and appreciated by your partner, you feel better about your marriage. And so I just want to reinforce to listeners out there to constantly highlight the things that they're doing beyond just the societal norms and show appreciation for those things.
So, how can couples achieve this appreciation in their relationships through the resources you offer, like the one-on-one coaching or the marriage toolkit?
So as you mentioned, I'm an accredited financial counselor, and I'm Fair Play certified. So a home labor specialist. I'm the only one in the country who has that. And one of the things that I do with my clients, I meet with individuals, but I primarily meet with couples. And we eventually get to the point where we establish custom systems in the home to try to create efficiencies and understanding of roles and responsibilities, to reduce conflict, and obviously to free up their personal time, with the goal being an equal amount of leisure time between both partners. And there are obviously, systems that I put in place based on their needs, but before we get to that, what's most important is to fully understand what the circumstances are psychologically and relationally with the couple. Like what types of intervention is necessary for them to get to the point where they feel like that they can do these things and still be their authentic selves. And for some couples, it's not necessary to spend a lot of time on that. They already recognize that teamwork in a marriage should not be dependent upon gender. Other couples struggle a little bit with that, and they need like some guidance and some understanding in how they both can work together and appreciate each other's work before we get into the systems themselves.
Now, you've brought up gender norms and traditional ideas within the marriage. So, how can these ideas of like who is the provider or who should be the primary breadwinner in a marriage negatively impact men on an individual level, but also in their relationships, and again, like affecting their mental load and mental health?
So there's two studies that I want to highlight. The first is that research has found that when men are contributing 60% of the overall household income, they are experiencing the least stress and anxiety. But when that changes, they begin to experience more. So let's say the man is the only financial provider. They experience a lot of stress, as anyone would. Women feel the same. But when it's 50-50, men actually experience some stress and anxiety because they feel like that because they're measured as a husband or a father by their paychecks, that they're not contributing, that even though it's 50-50, that they need to do more. And so what we know happens is that men thus spend more time away from the home trying to earn more money, and women are filling the void in the home that men leave by not being around as much. And we know that research from Dr. Claudia Golden out of Harvard, who won the Nobel Prize in Economics in 2023 for her work on the gender pay gap. And essentially what she found was that the gender pay gap has almost disappeared. The younger the person, the less likely there's a gender pay gap, with one exception. Essentially, it's the motherhood penalty. When women have children, they are then spending that their lifetime earnings then take kind of like a course correction. And it is likely because in many cases, women feel drawn to do more inside the home, and men feel like that they need to do more outside of the home because of what they saw growing up. But which is fine if that's what they want. Like that's the thing that people need to understand, is that as long as you're making an informed decision that aligns with your values and your own goals, that's a really a great thing if it's what you want as a couple and it's an informed decision. But oftentimes it's not. People just default into these decisions. And when in a relationship, when a woman has a higher earning power than a man, it's not necessarily financially rational. It might fit what they want to do, but if they want to maximize household income, there are other approaches to consider, like ways in which men then take on the more flexible job, like I have in my business, so women can be laser focused on their career. And those are the types of decisions that I think require intervention at times, because it's hard to see the light at the end of the tunnel, so to speak. We developed a calculator. So if you go to modernhusbands.com, it's free, the Family Financial Planning Calculator, where you can input your circumstances and see over a course of 15 years what would happen if you took leave from your job, or your partner did, or you just used childcare and neither of you took leave. And essentially what it shows you are what those financial implications are over a longer period of time. So that way, when you're deciding what to do, it's financially informed.
How do you work with clients who come to you with financial questions or plans for their future, where one spouse, let's say the husband has been the primary provider, and now the wife is taking time to go back to work. She wants to reestablish her career, and they need to make these greater shifts?
I think that first, I like to identify what those roles would look like in that circumstance that you're sharing. So I'll use the metaphor that we use in our relationship, where I was the rose and my wife was the gardener for years, and now my wife is the rose and I'm the gardener, meaning this. The gardener nourishes the environment inside the home to make sure that the rose can flourish outside of it. And that doesn't mean that the gardener doesn't work. It just means that there's a clear delineation between who's really shouldering more of the work, who is the domestic safety net, so the other partner can be have time freed up, both physical time and then the mental labor that goes with a job. More of that can be devoted toward the job. And that when you make a switch like that, there are going to be growing pains. It's not any different than if you're in an office and you have a job and you're taking over someone else's job, and the person's job you're taking is now your manager, right? That manager is now going to kind of instinctively micromanage you. And what happens? Everyone's frustrated, right? The micromanager is probably frustrated. The person being micromanaged is very frustrated. And in more cases than not, it's men being micromanaged, and it drives them nuts. And so you have to put systems in place to compartmentalize, these different roles and responsibilities, to ensure that when you go through this process, that ultimately the partner who's now doing more at home owns the process from start to finish, is not micromanaged, but is also the completion of the process is of satisfaction for both partners. So let's just say I'm just throwing out a clean kitchen. What is the minimum standard of care for a clean kitchen? Agree upon what that looks like, and then allow whoever is responsible for cleaning the kitchen to decide what the best way is. Like, don't tell somebody like how to do the dishes, or there's arguments about like, how do you stack the dishes in the dishwasher? Do you just throw it all in like a wild raccoon, or do you play the Tetris game? Like, these are the little things that you just walk away from and let the person who's responsible for cleaning the kitchen decide what's the best way to do it. And when you go through that process, there needs to be, communication and understanding as that you pass the torch from one person owning the task to the other.
Now, first of all, I really like that metaphor you brought up of the rose and the gardener, because I think oftentimes there's maybe a little disconnect where work outside the home is seen as the gardener to provide for the flourishing inside. But obviously, you need that stability at home so that you can succeed outside of it.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to ask about this communication aspect, because obviously it is so key to any relationship. But when you run into clients who maybe are lacking in their communication skills, or there is a little bit of that micromanaging because one is used to just trying to control everything or do everything, how do you foster that healthy communication and create those boundaries so that they can be successful when there is that shift and the torch is passed?
Well, if we're talking about, let's say we're talking about domestic labor, not money, right? So, because those are two very different things. Money is far more, it's more emotional. So as far as domestic labor, I use the fair play system as a base, because it is, kind of like, think of it as this like deck of cards of responsibilities that you divide up. And then when you divide them up, you work through what that looks like in your home. But how do I say this? You want to make sure that as you're working through that process, that you take turns being really great active listeners, meaning that as couples are talking, I might tell a couple, look, like when this person's sharing, the only thing that we are going to do over the next 5 minutes as this person is sharing is just ask questions. That's it. Just to learn more, to ask questions, because otherwise, if you're waiting, you hear something you don't like and you're like waiting to respond and it's on the tip of your tongue, it just leads to a dispute. Well, if you just tell people, look, you can't do that. You just have to ask questions to learn more. It makes the person doing the explaining feel more appreciated, but it also helps the other person better understand the circumstances. If it's money related, it's different. It's the same and different. I think with financial discussions, you have to take a step back that's deeper into somebody's childhood to understand like what types of money stories like shape your values. What are the things that perhaps create stress or anxiety that relate to money for you, and why? And really kind of get at the heart of the emotions that are connected to the money decisions that we make for each partner, and facilitate conversations between them to work through those emotions. Because let's just use budgeting or whatever. Like, playing around with numbers isn't hard. Like, anybody can do that, but people aren't spreadsheets. And so what has to be addressed are the feelings and the values, the relational aspects of it first, that drive far deeper into somebody's financial decisions than a conversation about a spreadsheet.
Obviously, money is one of the leading causes of divorce, and it does create a lot of tensions within the marriage. How is it possible to have, I guess, sustainable, equitable conversations about money, and like you said, shedding those past ideas of how money is managed, where maybe one partner is very set in their ways and has to budget? How do you move past that hurdle?
Mm. I think the first thing that we have to do is recognize that just talking regularly about money at a time when emotion is really low, so cognition can be high, is essential. Maybe it's Saturday mornings when the kids are still asleep and you're not stressed out at the end of your workday. But I think like the thing that matters most is to look at any problems that revolve around money as being solvable and that's something that you can solve as a team working together. And B, we have to have an abundance mentality. We have to recognize that money is a tool that we can use to build our dreams. And so instead of sitting down early in your relationship when you're first really discussing money and thinking about it in a restrictive way or in a punitive way, do it in a way that brings you joy. So for example, I love the lottery date. We buy a lottery ticket. We know we're not going to win. That's not the point, but we spend $2 to maybe win 1 billion. But when we have our money date, which could be, going for a walk in nature, could be we live in a golf cart community, golf cart ride, whatever it may be. We talk about what we would do with the money. We start to have dreams. And that and as we were discussing what we would do with, an obnoxious amount of money, that leads us into recognizing the patterns that we know make us both happy. So let's say, for example, you're having this money date. Like, what would we do if we won a lottery? And you recognize that you would outsource everything. You wouldn't mow your lawn anymore. You'd have a housekeeper once a week or whatever. Maybe you can't afford to have all of those things done, but you might be able to afford to have one of them done, right? Maybe like you notice that if you talk about winning the lottery, you wouldn't talk about building a, $50 million home. So maybe instead of thinking about moving to a bigger home, like a lot of people like to think like, hey, I'm going to get a pay raise, I'm going to move, I'm going to buy a bigger home and then a bigger home and a bigger home. Maybe it's like, oh, wow, we didn't talk about that. Well, we did talk about traveling. So maybe we should set financial goals to travel more frequently. So, so by doing that, by starting with like identifying what it is that you love to do together, what it is that makes you happiest, you can then build a budget that talks about how you would save and spend toward that. Then have the conversations that are more restrictive in nature. Like, okay, so what are we going to trim to be able to get to spending our money in the way that gives us happiness?
That's really interesting, that shift in your mindset.
Yeah.
And having that on not only removing like the anxiety about money, but also having it in everyday conversation, having this positive outlook. How important is this this frame of mind for the modern husbands and the mission you have?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's absolutely essential, whether it's financial labor, like domestic labor, like whatever it may be. Um, I think when you start with the fact that it's you and your spouse against the world and you're a team, and having an attitude of abundance and recognize that the work that we do in and outside of our home have value, and we should show appreciation for that value, and then have real meaningful conversations about what it is that we can do to live our lives in a way that gives us the most happiness, whether it's the things we do inside our home or the money that we spend. By doing those things at times when you're not just focused on the problem at the moment, but they're scheduled conversations when you are relaxed, that allows you to work better as a team. And if everything that you're doing is reactionary or by default or through assumptions because you're not communicating, you're not planning, you're not organizing, you're going to be stressed out. You're not going to be happy.
How can couples create a judgment-free space within their marriage to, like you said, have those types of conversation, but also acknowledge areas where they can improve as individuals or as a team?
It's so important to be empathetic and be humble. Like humility goes such a long way. And, um, you know, it goes back to that when you're having a conversation with one another, to being really active listeners, to like just really focus on understanding where your partner's coming from, what childhood memories like shaped how they feel about certain things, what experiences are shaping the way that they are approaching certain decisions. And when you're empathetic, meaning you're not just understanding, trying to understand, but you're trying to really feel what they're feeling, it makes it a lot easier to have a conversation about how you can work with each other's, not just their strengths, but the things that are needed to look at how we can balance out things they might struggle with.
In addition to having that empathy and being able to look through your partner's eyes at how they see the world, what else do you believe is key to
Low expectations. um, yeah, uh, I had a friend on, she wasn't a friend. Don't do enough is just to ask each other, what does the ideal or the perfect partner look like to you? That's it. Like, just describe it and then just really listen as your partner describes it. Not trying to connect, like, what do you already do that you're not doing? Or like, you're not listening to like find faults in yourself. You're listening to understand what her shining star, his shining star is.
That is really interesting to have those types of conversations and again, without making it about yourself and what you feel, but just trying to again listen to them. Now I do want to talk about your podcast before we wrap up. You host it with Dr. Bruce Ross and Christian Sherrill, and
Mhm.
you bring on experts to discuss money management and home management. What kind of impact have you seen from doing this?
Well, I think the greatest impact is me personally. I would do it if nobody listened. And so would my co-hosts. Like, we get to talk to the nation's leading experts in these areas. And so for me, it's like, okay, how can I apply this to my own relationship? So I'm having a lot of fun just recognizing that just by being a part of it, I'm learning a lot, and it makes me work toward being the best version of myself I can be. And I was at an FTA conference, Financial Therapy Association conference, and I've told lots of other people listen to it who are in that space who shared how much they appreciate it. Some college professors use it and send it along to their students as a part of their class to help them understand what some modern relationships look like and how to work through together as a team to be able to manage money in the home together. So it's been fun to hear those secondhand stories, or firsthand, I guess, with people at events. But frankly, selfishly, it's just great for me.
No, that's wonderful. Well, how can listeners reach you if they're interested in connecting, whether it's for a corporate event or for personal counseling?
Modernhusbands.com. Again, modernhusbands, that's plural.com. You'll find my contact information there. You'll find my podcast there. You can schedule appointments to meet with me there. And obviously I'm on social media as well, but yeah. And please feel free to reach out if you want to learn more about, what we're doing. As I said, I work with individuals, with couples. I do speaking engagements with corporations. And I also have a team of folks that do the same thing where we all work together and customize work for corporations to come in and talk about these topics.
Excellent. Thank you. And that'll be in the episode description. So if anyone missed it, it'll be there. But thank you so much for being on the episode today.
Hey, thanks for having me, Libby.
Of course. That's our show, folks. Thank you for listening to our Prenup Lawyer. Make sure to like and subscribe, and feel free to drop a comment below. Follow us on Instagram at Our Prenup Lawyer, and listen to us on Spotify, iHeart, Apple Podcasts, Audible, and watch us on YouTube. See you guys next time.